if you want to introduce yourself, and then if you have a question that's directed to someone in particular, just let them know, or if you're happy for anyone to answer, then.
Okay. My name is Amena Amer. I'm Muslim. Recently, I started wearing hijab, and I'm struggling with my top look because dressing what I'm dressing is like, it didn't change what I dress, it's just the top look. I'm struggling, but I'm hoping to learn from you. My question is for Reina. Lewis, I'm just really interested. I'm sorry, you don't have to talk too much, but I wanted to ask you what got you interested in Muslim fashion, because I would love to know. I mean, one of the slides makes sense that Muslim or hijab is about being humble, and then the amount of money paid for Muslim fashion, it just doesn't make sense. There's contradiction. So I would love to know from you what really attracted you into this kind of, yeah.
Thank you very much. I'll try to keep it to a short answer. Two things attracted me. Politically, my work had often been to do with what back in the day we used to call race and gender. So I looked at British and French colonial and imperial cultures. Can you hear me? Yes? So I looked at the way that in visual arts and literature in the 19th and early 20th century, the Western world was representing the Middle East and North Africa. And I looked very much at images of Orientalism and those sort of reclining odalisques. And that was really to do with trying to understand the way in which gendered identities were racialized and racial identities were gendered, what people now talk about as intersectionality. After 9/11, what I saw was that within this civilizational discourse that positioned all Muslims as potential terrorists, as opposed to saying all Muslims are just as much a threat from terrorist criminals as everybody else, what we saw were images of visibly Muslim women all over the news media, illustrating stories that were nothing to do with Muslim women's lives. It might be schoolboys in Bradford playing truant, and there'd be a picture of women in hijab at the school gates. And at the same time, on the streets of London and Britain, there were loads of really cool young women wearing hijab in conjunction with high street fashion, styling it in relation to global fashion trends. But this was not anywhere in the style media because, as you were saying, at that point, nobody was talking about Muslim fashion. So I thought, this is something that merits serious attention. And so that's where I started.
I'd like to thank all the panelists. It was a very interesting evening and very interesting discussion.
Sorry, could you just introduce yourself?
My name is Khadija Sakrani. I have a comment and probably a question as well. The comment is that I think it's very important that we don't replace the self-appointed guardians of women's modesty, who were traditionally the Maulvis and the Muftis standing in the pulpit, with those who hold the metaphorical pulpit, which are the domain names that represent modest fashion. It's very important that we don't replace the one with the other. And there's really no we when we're discussing this. There's no we as a uniform description of a Muslim woman. And I think one of the best things about London as the heart of where modest fashion started is that we're non-conformists. None of us fit into a box, or we shouldn't. And the Muslim modest fashion market needs to develop in such a way in which it doesn't determine and dictate to anyone what the we is or how it should look. The question is, where do you think the mainstream market is going to go? Do you think the mainstream market is eventually going to cannibalize the modest fashion market and make it redundant? Or do you think you will be able to stand on your own in the long run?
Whoever wants to take that, feel free. Yeah, you start.
Thank you, Khadija. So,
Just move the mic.
Pull your microphone down.
Right, yeah.
Does that help? Quite a few comments in there. In terms of understanding where the mainstream is heading and whether that would make all our conversations pretty much redundant, I think ultimately the mainstream is never actually going to represent Muslim women and the many different diverse aspects of Muslim women, and we do keep seeing that in brands. They are very much have a boxed-in view of what Muslim women are, and we speak about this billion-dollar industry, but actually behind that billion-dollar industry is a real community which is made up of many really diverse opinions. I mean, like with Amalia, the reason we have writers, the reason we represent different bloggers is because there is no one Muslim voice. It is made up of very many different opinions, and I think the mainstream are always going to not be able to cater to that. It is a whole different industry. I mean, Dolce & Gabbana, they are going to cater to a certain type of Muslim woman. Every time we see coverage, we do see a very particular stereotype. So yeah, I think there will always be a space to represent the true voice of Muslim women and the true opinions, if that answers your question.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Could I ask maybe Alia Khan also, after you do, to comment on that?
Thanks. Do you mean that you're concerned that the mainstream will somehow upstage the modest fashion players and they will somehow sort of take over the business? Is that your concern?
I think to the extent that there are platforms that sell modest fashion, they might continue because they will curate, perhaps. But to the extent that there are modest fashion brands, you see Mango, Zara, all the high street brands are doing it. And in what way can our modest fashion Muslim brands compete?
Well, I'm of the opinion that I think we should embrace and welcome everyone. I don't think anything in Islamic economy is exclusive to Muslims. And so I encourage it. Look, we can say whatever we want about Dolce & Gabbana, but at the end of the day, they gave us a huge mainstream nod. They acknowledged our huge market, and they said we were important enough for them to pay special attention to us. And that's worth something. And I realize that some weren't pleased with the collection, and some weren't pleased with Dolce & Gabbana in general because of what they represent, and perhaps it speaks to the argument that, are they the right ones to do anything for our market because of things that they've represented in the past and what they've stood for, perhaps not unlike other major brands. But at the end of the day, they have every right to cater to our market as the rest of us do. And I think really what it's got to be about is who's going to give us the best options and who's going to allow us to live within our lifestyles. With comfort, convenience, and quality, keeping it tayyib, keeping it ethical and sustainable, and at the same time as allowing us to feel respected. So I'm not worried about mainstream gobbling up the modest fashion industry. I think I'm more concerned about the modest fashion industry players really stepping up and understanding that their level of quality and professionalism has got to meet where mainstream has gotten. Now, mainstream has had quite a head start, no doubt. But, we've got our work cut out for us. And so, in a way, perhaps it's healthy that they light a little bit of a fire under us and say, you know what, we came up with this bio line, and we say, great, let's see how we can complement that or even do better. And so perhaps a collaborative approach with the mainstream fashion industry could be a healthy way. What I want to avoid in modest fashion is that unnecessary competitive angle that fashion generally introduces. I don't think it's necessary. And I think that there's a way that we can sort of do this differently because of the character that we uphold.
Do you still want to make a comment?
So going back to that question, I think there will always be room for modest fashion, and it's not why there will always be room. It's because we're made up of so many different cultures. We come from so many different backgrounds, and this is something that's forever changing. For example, when I was talking to my supplier and they asked me about a scarf, and they were saying the measurements, and I said, okay, you're thinking about a South Asian market. I'm talking about my UK, USA market. They have a different mentality and they want a different type of fashion. What is fashionable in South India is not fashionable here today. And there's always room for modest fashion. And it's something that I think will continue regardless if these high couture brands start selling them. There's always going to be room for this.
Okay. Yep. Good to wait for the mic. Thanks.
Thank you. I just had a quick comment. I wrote it before the actual talk itself because of the Facebook post about the 3 questions that the talk was planning to answer. And you guys did answer. Thank you so much for that. And I'm glad that we touched on the ethics behind the actual clothing and how they're made and so forth. I think one of the main questions that I wanted addressed perhaps in more detail was how is the world of internet retail, bloggers and magazines changing the way Muslims shop? So mine's more of a comment as opposed to a question, but you're welcome to kind of comment back. And I believe it's destroying it. So with Dina Tokyo being represented on a bus, etc., what was the thing that was written next to her? The slogan, it was breaking stereotypes. And I feel like now a Muslim woman can't walk out of her home without feeling as though she needs to be breaking some kind of stereotype. She needs to be crossing boundaries and she needs to be claiming her space, which she's already done. And I think whilst it can be said that it's a good thing. She feels obliged to do it, and that in itself is unjust and unfair. Whilst it can be said that the styling and the fashionizing of the hijab and of modesty is great and it brings acceptance, and now Muslim women are going to want to wear the hijab more, we need to come back to the basis of our faith. The idea of submission, why were we wearing it in the first place? Was it to style it? Which by all means you're allowed to do. It's a mubah issue, you can do it as long as it's in the realms. But what's your reason? What are the actions behind is the intentions not behind the actions the main thing? And I think the last point I have to make is we also have the commodifying of the Islamic dress code. Now, of course, I would give my 100% of support to the Muslim startups, but unfortunately, I don't think they're going to survive because the mainstream brands are coming in. And the question is, are they going to allow a collaboration, as you commented, as you said earlier on? And I don't think they will because we live in a capitalist environment. And I feel that a lot of the time when we want to talk about acceptance and these brands accepting us, we need to look towards our Niqabi sisters and ask them, you cover your face, do you feel accepted? Do you feel like you're being, your identity is being accepted? And I think the first thing to know, or maybe the last point to know, is that the catapulting of hijab into the limelight doesn't mean a universal acceptance of Islamic values. It simply means that capital markets and private market forces are now able to make benefit from Muslim women by attaching a monetary value to them. And I think we are pawns in the bigger scheme of things.
I think your comment is wonderful, and I love hearing stuff like this because it gives me insight on what everybody's thinking, and and it shows us range. What you're saying about the internet and breaking stereotypes, and you're right. Perhaps there's a lot of pressure on certain people thinking, well, I'm just wearing a hijab because that's what I want to do, and I really don't want to sort of stand for anything. I just want to be normal. And I get that, but I think there are times when even that woman that wants to just be normal isn't made to feel normal. And so when Dina Tokyo, or when anybody for that matter, sort of steps up and does something a little bit out of the box, perhaps, it is what it is, but perhaps it should be encouraged as well, because by them attempting to sort of be on the side of buses or billboards or whatever they've agreed to do, it really does shift perspective, because remember, there is the other side, the ugly side to people's opinions about modest fashion and hijabi women in particular, or even the women that cover their faces, and it's a very harsh opinion, and it's hurt people. It's literally hurting people. After Trump won the election, I'm so sorry I have to bring this up, but you were hearing a lot of stories, real life stories. I mean, people that I know, I grew up in California, that are being attacked. So, we're living in very strange times. And so, if there's campaigns like that going on, more power to it. I don't think that it can harm any. And if anything, perhaps that image is good for the person that is inclined towards hating. And as far as the internet and what it's doing, another valid point, and I love your insight. I think it's really important for us to hear that. But again, if we didn't have the internet, if we didn't have the social media, the modest fashion industry wouldn't be where it is today. Because believe me, nobody else was willing to acknowledge it. Whether it was Harrods or Marks and Spencer's or Harvey Nicks, no one was willing to say, well, you know what, we're going to acknowledge this huge mammoth market and we're going to do something for them. Nobody. So what happened was we started taking selfies and we started, putting up, different sort of ensembles and whatnot, and people started liking it, and things started getting popular and looks starting it, and pretty soon this became a norm. And it's nice to feel normal once in a while. And the social media kind of helped us to sort of slide into that space. We do still have work to do, but that work is important.
I'm just having a fangirl moment. Professor Lewis is right there, so I just wanted to say thank you. There's something very interesting that you mentioned. You just brushed on it. And I just wanted to get an idea if there's somewhere else I could read up more on it, this comparison between the Muslim industry and the uprising of this gay industry, fashion industry, whether your book covers that topic, because I think that is a very interesting comparison and can give us a little more sort of insight into the world of commerce and fashion in general. Is there any other place that we could read about it, or is it, are you?
I'll just take that really quickly, if I may, because
No,
then we'll
that's
go
fine.
back to that. And I think, yes, I do write about that in the book, shameless self-promotion. But also, I think what's useful for me in thinking about that, and that's come through in so many of the valuable comments and contributions we've had, is it's really important not to see the Muslim modest fashion industry or the Muslim fashion consumer as somehow exceptional. Mm-hmm. There are many, for years I was hearing from the Muslim women that I would be talking to about their clothes, our needs aren't being met by the fashion industry. And the fashion industry was aversive, and now suddenly it sees Muslim women consumers as an asset. But, lots of women don't have their needs met by the fashion industry. You try being a fat teenager or a 60-year-old bride. Lots of women don't have their needs met by the mainstream fashion industry. And I think in terms of the learning, whether it's about planning for your business or for your research or for teaching your students, it's finding what are the other comparisons that will allow us to think the best way we can about this particular set of experiences and market.
Okay, so we're going to wrap it up here. Thank you. I'd like you to join me in thanking the panel for sharing their comments and experiences and sharing their expertise with us. And thank you to the audience for coming here, for listening and for engaging with the discussion so beautifully. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.